Hey, welcome back to Top of the Morning, and this morning we are really blessed. Dwight Pettit. This gentleman has been a part of history, political history here in this country. He was a part of three very important civil rights cases in American education. And Dwight Pettit, I remember you as a football player at Howard University.
I love that, John. Thank you very much. Very few people remember that.
And I was just impressed that you were also big, strong, and smart.
Thank you.
All right. Well, talk about your book. The book that you wrote is Under Color of Law, and the story of an American family. Give us a summary of what's going on here.
Well, basically, let me talk about what inspired me to write the book. My father was an electronic engineer for the federal government, Aberdeen Proving Ground, one of the first African-American engineers hired by the government here. And he was transferred from Fort Halliburton in Baltimore County to Aberdeen Proving Ground. We had moved to Harford County, not knowing that the schools were still segregated, because this was 1958, several years after Brown versus Board of Education. We went up to Aberdeen High School, and I was denied admission. My father, being the civil rights activist that he was, immediately retained the NAACP. I got the NAACP Thurgood Marshall, Jack Greenberg, Anita Jackson Mitchell, and Tucker Durham was my lawyers. We went to federal court, integrated Aberdeen High School, my being the first African-American male to attend. But as a result of that, as you said, John, I was an athlete, so I really didn't have problems at school. And athletes, I've always argued, is almost an integration thing within itself. If you kick the ball, hit the ball, run the ball, throw the ball, knock somebody out, you don't have a problem. But they brought hell and damnation down to my father in his workplace. And I had the opportunity to grow up, and over a period of 12, 13, 14 years, they told me never be promoted again, put rebel flags up in his office, played Dixie when he came to work, ordered us off the military base where we were living. And I had the opportunity to one day see that there was a case in Washington, D.C. being handled by a man by the name of Paul Tagliabue, who was the head of the NFL at that time, or would be the NFL commissioner. And I took my father's case into the United States Court of Claims, second highest court in the nation on monetary value. I had the opportunity to bring his case in the United States Court of Claims, and we won the case. In 1973, in a 4-3 decision. It was the first case in the nation where an African American was awarded back pay for discrimination on the same basis of what Mr. Obama is arguing now in terms of executive order. So it did two things. It established executive order, the power to provide remedy for past discrimination, and it ordered what is called the but-for test, meaning that if you allege discrimination and you say you qualify, the burden shifted to the defense to come back and show why, but for race, that you didn't get the promotion. So having said that, when my father was on his deathbed, I promised him that I would tell our story. So I wanted to write about that and tell the nation the importance of that particular case, but I also wanted to alert America, as a civil rights lawyer that I've been for the past 45 years, I wanted to alert America in terms of what was happening and to the movement backwards in terms of racial progress and everything that we fought for and died for and bled for in the 70s and 60s and so forth was now in a reverse mode, basically starting with President Ronald Reagan and so forth. And so that was the reason for the book, and the book goes on in terms of being a memoir of my life and my involvement with politics, my involvement on a national level with cases that I litigated, and presidential politics, having the opportunity to meet Jimmy Carter very early up and be considered to be the first United States attorney in the nation for states, the first African American, and a lot of other great experiences that I've had. So the book brings all that together in a story form of talking about what we're going through now as a nation, and really predicting what would take place in terms of the civil rights. I predicted in the book in 2012 that the civil rights issue of the 21st century would be police brutality. Wow. Didn't know that I was going to be so accurate in terms of the cases that I discussed. That I handled one with Johnny Cochran, another one with Billy Murphy, a prominent lawyer here. And some of the big wins that we had is we saw this police brutality thing coming to the forefront. And one of the reasons that, of course, is because technology sort of propelled it to the front pages, where we lawyers who were crying out about what was happening to black people across the nation was sort of right. We sure you're right. But technology and cell phones and sort of highlighted that. And so the book runs through those type of things and experiences that I have been fortunate enough to partake of.
All right. Well, I'm just amazed. You know, we shoot on the USS Constellation right in Baltimore's Inner Harbor, and we have tourists all around us, and they're walking by and they're doing all that touristy sort of thing. But this conversation is really vital. You predicted the police conduct as being the next civil rights frontier area. We have a black president. Oprah is one of the richest persons in media, politics, the media, the world of athletics. Our athletes, our black athletes, are some of the most highly paid people in the world. Where are the frontiers that we have to conquer in civil rights at this point?
Well, it's two things that happen. When the civil rights, and let me just say, John, if I may, so people know why I'm dripping wet, not only on this great historical ship, the Constellation, but I came in through the rain. So this is not sweat. This is Mother Nature and rain. But it's two things. When Martin Luther King talked about a check that was uncashed and it was returned for insufficient funds, he was talking not only about integration, but he was talking about economic opportunity and partaking of the American dream. Well, America only seemed to understand half of that to a certain extent. They said, well, we'll have integration, but they didn't fulfill that promise in terms of the economic involvement and participation in terms of American life. And so I think when we talk about that, we have to look at what has happened since the 60s and the 1965 Civil Rights Act, 1964 Civil Rights Act. 65 did a great thing because it was the Voting Rights Act, which is now under attack by the United States Supreme Court, of course. But what that struggle did was give us the opportunity to at least have elected officials and participate in the political process. But we still never got to full participation in the economic process. And so we look back now in 2015, 2016, and we see that thousands of people without jobs, hundreds of thousands of people without jobs. People are still living in the ghetto. People are living disadvantaged. Schools are in a deplorable. Public education is in a deplorable sense. The HBCUs, I went to Howard University, undergrad and law, are under attack financially. And so we found that everywhere we look in terms of the jails are masked with young African American men because of the policies of this nation in terms of sentencing guidelines and mandatory sentences and the war on drugs, which was a war on us. That destroyed millions and millions of families, well, hundreds of thousands of families at least, with incarcerating men and no males in the home and what have you. So all of this was put into action. And I observed this because I was in the Nixon administration when we were talking about affirmative action and what have you. All that's under attack. In fact, Supreme Court just ruled yesterday that affirmative action is still good in terms of diversity, in terms of higher education. But everything that we fought for was either being on attack or being reversed. And so my argument in the book is that we have a responsibility not just to bathe in the glory, the light of glory for our accomplishments and victories, but for our children and generations to come. We need to fight not only to maintain those things that we accomplish, but to fight in terms of economic participation in this nation. It's not just the have and the have-nots, but we need to all have an opportunity to be in the haves.
All right, know our history or we're doomed to repeat it. What are the remedies? If somebody died and put you and me in charge, what do we do?
Well, I think first of all, one of the big opportunities that we're having is not only the participation in the election, but see, I'm a very religious person. And I believe that God has shown us a light in terms of the unfortunate, if you want to say it that way, death of Mr. Scalia, which centralized everything in terms of the nation, knowing now that the Supreme Court is where the prize is. The Republican Party understands that. The Democratic Party understands that. We have to make sure that we seize political power in return. And understand this now. I worked in the Nixon administration and Small Business Administration. When I worked on affirmative action, I supported a governor from Maryland right here who was a Republican, Bob Early, who sat down with me and we drew up an agreement in terms of HBCUs, in terms of commitment to the black community. So I'm not being partisan. But right now, The National Republican Party, through Donald Trump and other mechanisms, has shown that there is no favor in their concept for African Americans. And Trump has already said what he's going to do with the court. And so I'm not a fan of Hillary Clinton. I sort of like the burn, but whoever we get, it's imperative that we realize the first step is to make sure that we exercise our political power in spite of what the Supreme Court has done to the Voting Rights Act. And we seize the next president, because the next president will appoint at least now one and maybe three, because of the age of the court, at least 3 judges, maybe 4, to the Supreme Court. Those judges are there for life. That's not 2 years as a congressman, 6 years as a senator, 4 years as a president. That's life, and that will change and determine what the law is in this nation for the next generations.
So we have to vote. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Right, exactly. And this is a great opportunity, this being an election year, with a presidential election, because the Supreme Court is the prize. And we need to understand that, and the Republican Party understands, that the court will be controlled by whoever this president is, will appoint justices who will be there for life. And he will have the opportunity, or she, to appoint at least 2, possibly 3, because of the age of the justices. Now, you know, I've been bipartisan throughout my career, but in this particular instance, the progressive judges are the judges that the Democratic Party has decided that we've seen appointed in the last 20 or 30 years, and that is absolutely necessary. It's absolutely a prerequisite so that we put in the right president, that will put in the right justices, and therefore if we get that done, interpretation of the laws will be progressive down the line. Then we'll be able to come to the table in terms of talking about economic participation, because we will have exerted the political power. So what can we do, John, right now?
Yes.
Right now we need to exercise that political power as a people across this nation and send a message.
The story of an American family under color of law, A. Dwight Pettit. We're on Top of the Morning, and we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with more of Top of the Morning. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Top of the Morning. I'm John Carrington, and I have the pleasure of interviewing A. Dwight Pettit, who wrote this wonderful book, The Story of an American Family Under Color of Law. And, of course, how do you get a hold of the book? How can our...
Amazon.com, our universe is the publisher, of course, and Barnes & Noble. And I understand now it's being distributed worldwide, because the second edition is out. But let me tell you, John, if I may, let me go through you might be interested in how the book gets its name. Right after the Freedom, Emancipation Proclamation and the freedom of slaves, the South was such a horrendous place in terms of the brutality being inflicted upon the newly freed slaves. The atrocities were unimaginable. And we had the good fortune of a man becoming president after Lincoln, not Johnson, not Andrew Johnson. Let me just say my favorite president is Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Okay.
I want to make sure people understand. Andrew Johnson was Lincoln's vice president, but Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, had been the commanding general of the Union armies, and he became president of the United States. And when he became president of the United States, he decided to go into Congress to get authority to move federal forces, both federal troops as well as marshals, into the South to protect the newly freed Negro slaves. And so that's called the version of 42 U.S.C. 1983, which was passed by Congress in 1871, as well as 18 U.S.C., which is the criminal statute, 252. And that was called the Civil Rights Act, Under Color of Law, is where we get the name of the book. And it was also called, the act was called the Ku Klux Klan Act. Wow. So that's where the book gets its name. I don't know why Ulysses S. Grant doesn't get the play that he should get, because in my opinion, he was probably one of the greatest presidents, along with Lincoln and Lyndon Baines Johnson. Not counting Obama yet, because
and of course Eisenhower, the National Highway Bill that of course tied all of our various states and
not only that, but Eisenhower put troops in Arkansas, remember?
Yeah, I remember.
Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yeah,
so that's why I said I'm not being partisan. I give credit where credit is due.
It's not a Democratic thing, it's not a Republican thing, it's an American thing.
That's right. And so we have to put our power and our votes with those people who are going to indicate what they're going to do for our community.
What are your goals? What are you planning to do now? You've written the book. How about the movie?
Well, that's what I'm waiting for. Hopefully that will happen, but in the meantime, I turned 70 a few months ago, and I'm still...
You don't look it.
Thank you, praise the Lord. I still feel good, and I'm still practicing law. And
how about playing football?
Well, the football days are over. But you say you're laughing, but I did run a little basketball a few years ago. Down here in the gym. I'm still a gym rat. Okay. So, but I'm trying to get into golf now, John. That's a little better with these old brittle bones.
Yeah, I play chess. I don't get hurt too much on the chessboard.
No, but you need to do something for the body. That's the chest stimulates the brain.
All that helps. All right, I started walking 3 miles a day too. Well, anyway, let's not get on my subject.
But yes, I do that. My wife and I, we're big athletes. She's very much a physical person in terms of all the right stuff to eat.
Right.
And walking, we walk in the park here all the time.
Beautiful. All right, well, you did touch on a little bit of police brutality in your book, but has anything changed since?
If it's changed, it's gotten progressively worse. Now, let me give you a statistic, John. In 2015, 102, minimum, at least 102 African Americans unarmed were killed in the United States by police. 102 unarmed African Americans, including men and women. And so there has been no sanction. There's been no criminal sanction. The laws protect the municipalities in terms of monetary damages, in terms of civil proceedings under 42 U.S.C. under code law. They are protected, say for example here in Baltimore, Maryland, they're protected by a $200,000 cap, which is no money. Police officer can kill somebody, he's not going to jail, he's not going to be prosecuted, and the city doesn't have to pay any money. And it's an irony that you would ask the question, because here, I've always argued that while they were looking at Cleveland and looking at New York and talking about the Midwest, Baltimore is the capital of police brutality. I've just met a few months ago with the Justice Department and turned over at least 35 cases that we're handling right now in one office in terms of police brutality. And so you say to yourself, how? Now Baltimore is under investigation by the Department of Justice, but you say, how could all of this be going on right in Baltimore, which is 35 miles from D.C. and the Justice Department? And it has been torrid here. In the book, I talk about cases where they talk about Freddie Gray being on video. I got some cases coming up to trial. If a video had been available, people would be horrified in terms of the beatings and the shootings and things that have been administered in terms of black folks for doing nothing but driving while black, walking while black, riding while black.
Is that against the law?
Yeah, it can cost you your life. It can cost you your life very, very quickly. And so the answer to your question, and I've done depositions. Here's what's mind-boggling. I did a deposition with God. In fact, Johnny Cochran was in on this case. We did a deposition of police officers, and they shot a guy in the back of the head and killed him while they were putting handcuffs on him. And this was a few years ago. And also, I got some of the largest verdicts, but this one settled. But the point was, when we did the deposition, believe it or not, all of the police officers that were involved in the shooting had been promoted. They weren't charged. They weren't indicted. They weren't excommunicated from the police department. They weren't fired. They weren't disciplined. They were promoted. And so it was almost like a red badge of courage. You got in, you killed a so-and-so, it's a good thing. And that is an affliction that has affected this nation, and particularly since you asked the question, this is the perfect example of what we're sitting in Baltimore City while the Freddie Gray case just ended yesterday in terms of one of the officers who was acquitted.
Wow.
When the young man obviously went into the van healthy and came out with a broken neck. was found criminally
You
culpable.
predicted that the next civil rights battleground would be with the police and their conduct with the public. Do you have any predictions about what's going to happen after, and this is assuming that we resolve the problem with police brutality, what's the next frontier?
Well, I think one of the nation, what you saw here that was exhibited by Freddie Gray, which stimulated or was stimulated from that, was the back to economics. That's the main frontier.
Okay.
When you look at all the people that are unemployed, when you look at all the people that have been allowed to, as they fuse and push the dope and the guns into the African community, and people couldn't get jobs, they can't do anything else, so they have to resort to illegal behavior. It puts them in a situation where we're killing each other. We talk about police killing, we're killing each other at a rate that is unimaginable in terms of the decimation of the African American population.
Just
And
this
so,
past week, 9 shootings.
and look at Chicago.
Yeah.
And Baltimore's right there per capita population. And so we have got to face up in terms of this nation facing up to its obligations to provide decent education, decent opportunity, decent schools, so people can break this cycle of poverty and this cycle of the only way I can make it is sell some dope and stand on the corner. That is major. That runs hand in hand with police brutality, and I think that's what you want to call them the riots, or you want to call them protests. That's what it showed in Baltimore City, that we looked at these areas of the police commissioner at that time, a man by the name of Batts, even said, we're still existing in two Americas, just like we did when they did the study back in the 60s for the Lyndon Johnson administration. We have one poor and one of extreme wealth, one black and one white. And obviously that cannot continue. We've got to solve this economic disparity question in terms of the distribution of wealth in this nation.
Well, the book states that you were able to make civil rights strides in the area of education. You challenged the systems that would not allow you to go to school because of your color. Will education be our ultimate solution? In other words, if you give people a good education, then of course there's that opportunity for jobs, skills that are marketable. Do you see that as being our solution?
I think that's a major factor too. But I don't think anybody can, to a certain extent, go to school and be hungry or achieve in terms of academics if there's not some type of economic base. I mean, some of us have been lucky enough to escape.
We say like Bernie Sanders, free college.
Well, you know, that's nice if it could happen, and I'm sure Mr. Sanders had programs as to how they were going to be paid for. But you got to remember that not only has this nation shut down, whether it's de facto discrimination or de jure discrimination, but we still have two separate Americas in terms of school systems. And then when we go to higher education, the great universities and so forth, like Howard, Morgan right here, they are now being starved out and starved to death because of economics and the refusal of the mainstream America to in fact give them economic parity or economic stability that they need to be competitive. I said right here in the book, I was appointed by a Republican governor to the Board of Regents. Right here, one of the biggest suits in the nation right now is filed and being administered right in the federal courts as we sit here because of economic deprivation in terms of funds to the HBCUs, that they have been just allowed to decay and dissipate because there's a overall thinking that there's a conspiracy to do away with HBCUs.
How can this happen under the watch of a black president?
Well, as much as I love Mr. Obama, some things we've had to educate Mr. Obama. You know, there's certain things that the Obama administration has not addressed. For example, the farming situation, farmers, black farmers, the HBCUs in terms of certain things coming out of the Department of Education. So we, you know, just like there was some deficiency in terms of him not appointing a black to the Supreme Court. So he's been great, but he hasn't been as good as he could be.
Okay. Well, we're here on the USS Constellation, and of course, one of the things they do on ships is yell and scream to make orders happen so that the boat will float. So we're going to take a break on that one.
That's a great
and we'll be back with more Top of the Morning. Don't go anywhere. of the Morning. I'm John Carrington. I'm here with A. Dwight Pettit, the author of The Story of an American Family Under Color of Law by A. Dwight Pettit. You worked with Thurgood Marshall.
I didn't work with Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was my attorney when I integrated the schools in Harford County. He was one of the distinguished team that my father secured help from the NAACP, and there was a lady by the name of Juanita Jackson Mitchell.
That's right.
Out of Baltimore, one of the great lawyers, the Mitchell family. Thurgood Marshall was lead counsel. She was local lead counsel. Tucker Durham was local NAACP counsel, and Jack Greenberg was head of the Legal Defense Fund.
Wow.
And so that whole team came in to in fact establish the precedent of Brown versus Board of Education here in Maryland. The interesting part about it, the judge ruled in my favor, but he didn't rule in my favor on the basis of Brown versus Board of Education. He ruled on my favor in terms of Plessy versus Ferguson, and said he found that the schools were unequal in Maryland, where Plessy said segregation was fine as long as there was equality between the segregated schools. He said they're segregated, that's fine, I don't find that a violation of law, but the white schools are far light years ahead of the black schools. So young Pettit has the constitutional right to go to the white school, even if he's not successful. He has a right to fail. That's what he does.
Beautiful, beautiful. So
Judge Roselle Thompson.
you were right in the midst of the civil rights struggle.
And Thurgood came in, and I was so young, I didn't really realize his impact at the time. But I later heard through my law partner, later on Michael Mitchell, the son of Juanita Jackson Mitchell, that Thurgood turned the federal court out here in Maryland when he argued the case. And in fact, I understand it got so stressful, he slammed out the courtroom and didn't come back to Maryland. Miss Mitchell had to finish it.
Oh my. Would you accept an appointment to the Supreme Court?
I think at my age it wouldn't be beneficial because we need somebody young who's going to be here for a while, since it's a lifetime appointment. I did, and in the book it tells you how I was very close to Jimmy Carter. I had the opportunity to run into him very early in his campaign, and so I was offered, not officially, but possibility of a federal judicial appointment when I was, at that time I was 25, 26 years old. And I told Andy Young, I said, Andy, I don't want to be bored as a judge right now, but that's how it came about that I was considered for United States Attorney. And the president did try to appoint me U.S. Attorney, which, as I indicated, I've been the first African-American U.S. Attorney in the nation for the state. But believe it or not, it was the liberal senator here in Maryland that basically quashed the nomination, because the way that works, the senator has to make the recommendation to the White House, and then the White House makes the nomination. As the Washington Post said at the time, Pettit blows in the wind. So I blew in the wind while that nomination was being considered.
The highlight of your career?
I guess the highlight of my career is funny, John. I always say I started off at the top, both in politics, because I started off in politics with a President Jimmy Carter. In fact, he's here this week, or will be here next week. And I started off in terms of the law on top at the U.S. Court of Claims, across the street from the White House, in front of 7 federal judges, in George Pettit versus the United States. So both of my highlights of my career was almost like in the beginning. But I would like to say I didn't go downhill. I just stayed consistent.
Lateral move. You ran a lateral end around. What would Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. say about the state of civil rights?
Well, I think Dr. King would be very, very dissatisfied with the progress that America is making, as well as the direction that America has taken. Dr. Martin Luther King was very, very explicit when he talked about that check being returned for insufficient funds. And what he was talking about, because as you remember, he had moved from the civil rights argument to the economic argument. That's right. That's why he was in Memphis. That's what caused his death, because he was moving then to the Poor Man's March in D.C. and so forth. I was living in D.C. at the time. So he was moving not only in terms of his arguments against the Vietnam War, but he was also moving in the area of talking about the necessity of economic participation with this nation, which we talk about in the clip. And speaking of that, last week, 2 weeks ago, one lost a person who was a big idol of mine, and that was Muhammad Ali. Right. I speak about him in the book too, and had the opportunity to be in his company on many, many occasions. And I give credit to the book to some of, not only just political leaders, but some of the great leaders in this nation who have fought to bring down racial and religious barriers.
Right. We have a clip, I believe, about your discussion of Dr. King's legacy. Let's take a look at that.
Last night when we touched upon a lot of this in terms of where we were and also what we're moving toward in terms of remedy. I referred back to my book, and I would like to do so again under color of law, not for the fact of promoting the book, but for the fact that I sort of anticipated in the writing of the book to a certain extent of what was going to take place in this nation that is now taking place. And I am still saddened that I was so on target in terms of predicting what the issue is, the main issue in America and race relationships today. In the book that I wrote, I stated when I was completing it in 2012, 2013, that the civil rights issue of America coming into the 2000s would be excessive force and police brutality. Little did I know that I was going to be so accurate that the issue was going to in fact capture the nation. Now, why did it capture the nation? One of the main reasons that it captured the nation was the advancement of technology and the fact that we began to see some things in reality, in real time, that may have been going on for years. But there was no document and no evidence to come forward to, in fact, substantiate it with such a degree of clarity. People think about the cases that I have won in terms of police brutality. And first, let me say that was not my intent to get into just the area of litigation of police cases. It just seemed to fall in my lap and happen. But the cases that I have won have been awesome in terms of their precedent and the damage issues. But people would be shocked at the cases that I've lost. And the reason that becomes important is because the public recognizes, as these ladies and gentlemen, as just was said by Janet, have a tremendous job, a very dangerous job, a rough job, a job that requires split decisions and split timing that in fact involve life and death. And believe it or not, juries are very much aware of that. And so sometimes it becomes more practical to think about the cases that I've lost than the cases that I've won, because juries tend to give the benefit of the doubt to the police. And this is understandable when you're living in an urban environment that is infested with the type of criminal activity that we see every day. The public wants the police to protect us. The public wants to reward and understand the pressure and the stress under which police officers operate. And so a lot of times when we talk about policies and procedures in terms of police departments, we have to intertwine that in terms of our understanding. The book was named Under Color of Law because the statute is 42 U.S.C. 1942 U.S.C. 1942. And it's a statute that was created back in 1871, along with the criminal statute that went along with it under the 18 U.S.C. U.S.C. is standing for United States Code. And the sections there, 245 and on and on and on. And the reason that came about, let me just give you a slight historical perspective, is because after the Civil War and after the freedom of the slaves and we went into the area of Reconstruction, the slaves or freed slaves were very much in jeopardy of physical harm, death, mutilation, castration, everything that was happening in terms of this resentment of what had happened in the Civil War was taking place. And people don't realize the president at the time, Lincoln, was gone, and Ulysses S. Grant went to Congress and asked for legislation to allow federal troops and federal marshals to go into the South to, in fact, protect these newly freed people. Now, the reason it becomes under color of law because the statute actually says whoever acts under color of law pursuant to authority, regulation, and what have you, to deprive these people of the rights of citizenship, which first might have said color, but it evolved into the rights of citizenship. And it was called the Ku Klux Klan Act. Now, why this becomes relevant to us is because the people that were acting pursuant to this law, pursuant to Jim Crow and pursuant to authority, were basically the people in control of these small towns and rural areas and cities within the South, and the police departments, and the police chiefs. And the police were, in fact, enforcing, and like one person said on the show that I was watching the other day, I went to call the police, and I had this in one of my cases, and I realized that the people that were burning and destroying my property were, in fact, the police. So there is a historical basis to how the African American community perceives the interaction with the police versus what's in subject today, the non-African American community. There are two tremendously different perceptions of whether the people there are there to protect them or whether they're there as an occupying force. And so this is something that has developed, and in Baltimore City, we have been, I don't know whether you all remember Judge Ken Johnson. Well, Judge Ken Johnson was one of the great civil rights litigators of this community, who oftentimes is not given credit. And the reason I mention that because he not only was he the main litigating force in terms of the firemen in Baltimore City, the Vulcan Blazers, but he also represented the Vanguards, which was the black police organization, which was designed and came about to protect the police officers within the department from discrimination in terms of hiring, firing, and promotion. And so if you look at the fact that within the Baltimore City Department there was a history of discrimination, a history of racial exclusion, a history of non-promotion, then it's much easier to translate that in terms of the actions of the police officers on the street and the reactions of the police or the people on the street to the police officers on the street. And so what we're really talking about is an inherent problem in American reality, that racism, as long as it exists in terms of America, it's going to be exacerbated or in fact demonstrate itself in a much earlier manner in terms of law enforcement. And now we've had tremendous strides to in fact eradicate those problems in terms of the top of the police force, African American police commanders and heads and colonels and majors and what have you. And this in fact has come down throughout the departments. So we have seen tremendous success. But then when we enter, as Jan and I were just talking about, when we have policies that come about in terms of zero tolerance, then we in fact create recreate the tension between the community and between law enforcement. When you say that I'm going to arrest thousands and thousands of people without probable cause and without justification, and I'm going to put them in jail, I'm going to hold them with no bails, I'm going to destroy their family income and their ability to in fact work and what have you, and you create this type of intention. And you add that along with what we all know came about in the 60s, even though that's another whole historical story as to how it came about, and that's called racial profiling. When you add these type of legislative movements in terms of racial profiling and couple that with things like zero tolerance, then you in fact are creating a breeding pool for discontent, for violent interaction between the public and the police, and for all the things that we see now manifesting itself across the nation. So Baltimore, as we know now, is not unique what's taking place in Ferguson, what's taking place in New York. And I say oftentimes, I know that I at one point in time was getting 30 to 40 calls a week on excessive force, to the point that at my office, we couldn't take them. We didn't know where to send them. Now look at all the cases that we've taken and all the cases that we have on the docket and all the cases that are open at this point in time. And we have to say, where is this nation going? We have to say, when they talked about Ferguson, when they talked about Watts, when they talked about Rodney King, I used to say all the time, if they had a camera or cameras, they could see what was happening in Baltimore City on a daily basis, that we as a body politic are accepting, would create a horrific response and backlash that we're now seeing across the nation. And so this is something, just giving you that brief history, that we have to look at in terms of what are the remedies, what are the resolutions, what are the abilities to resolve this problem in Baltimore, in Maryland, and across this great nation if we're going to survive as a fabric of one. We have come a long way in civil rights. We as a nation have made tremendous progress. People have died and given their lives, black and white, progressive people across this nation. School integration, public facilities integration, and now we see this ugly monster resurrecting itself because of a state of complacency that we as a progressive body of politics have come toward. That we believe that we've resolved our problems. We believe that we have been allowed to get to the promised land, which we have not. We believe that we have accomplished so much that now, as I say in the book, that we can sit on our laurels in a state of complacency, thinking that black and white and racial problems don't exist anymore. I remember I was given someplace a few months ago, and a minister, who's a very good friend of mine, said to me, I came up, he was having an affair, something like this, only it was younger people, and he was trying to relate to young people. I won't call his name. But he said, Dwight Pettit is here, one of those old-time civil rights lawyers. And I don't think he was referring to my age, because we were around the same age, but he was trying to relate to his audience. And he was referring to the old, meaning that I was still involved in civil rights litigation. And that was something of the past, or should be in the past. And so what he was saying to his audience, that he's outdated, he's living in another century, our problems don't exist any longer. And somebody needs to awaken him to that fact. And I took great offense to that. And when I did get to the mic, I in fact rejected the old concept of civil rights, because I explained to the audience that we as America have not overcome these difficulties and these wars that we have fought, that we as a nation are still confronted with Jim Crow. We're still confronted people acting under authority of law. What you saw in Florida was acting under authority of law when the young man was shot, in terms of the new theory of subjective determination, meaning that stand your ground. When you see the laws changed across this nation in terms of allowing people to use subjective determination to take the life of another individual, when we see that the laws, for example, in Ferguson, that if you're leaving or walking away, that the police officer, if you're running away and you don't obey his command, you can still be shot and killed, even though he's not approaching you in an aggressive manner and your life is not in jeopardy. So we have to watch what has happened across this nation in terms of legislation, which has slowly eked away as our constitutional rights for protection. And that as a matter of law, people are giving subjective determination, constitutional rights to act under law, or to take one's life. And where does that go? In most cases, that subjective determination is made because of the color of your skin, or the texture of your hair, or the fact that you are not considered part of the majority population. And that, just like racial profiling was declared to be unconstitutional, those are very, very dangerous premises to allow persons, both not only police, but civilian authority, police and others, to act pursuant and subjectively to take lives without being threatened, without being in apprehension of death or danger, to make those subjective determinations to take a human life and then claim they are acting under color of law. So I'll be open to questions also, and thank you very much for your time and attention.
Well, you mentioned Muhammad Ali and your connection with him.
Well, the thing was, the Muslims thought that I looked so much alike him. We were the same size, what have you. So every time he would get in the Maryland area, they would call and say, Mr. Pettit, your twin is here. You want to join him? And I said, great, fantastic. So I had the opportunity every time he'd come to Baltimore. So they asked me to do 3 rounds with him, exhibition.
Okay.
And I said, fantastic. So I was all ready to do this. But at the same time, I had been nominated by the president, as I indicated, to be U.S. Attorney. So I called the White House and said, is this really a good thing, or is it going to hurt my political chances in terms of the nomination? They said, well, Dwight, you better back off on this, because he was very controversial at the time.
Right.
And you don't need to give your political enemies any additional fuel. So that's one of the things that I dropped out, John, one of my regrets today is that I don't have pictures. And I told him, I said, champ, this is for fun. Don't get carried away. I'm bringing a baseball bat.
Oh, no.
And he laughed at me, because when they brought me into the room, they said, every time I come in, they just said, champ, here's your twin. And he jumped up and said, he ain't as pretty as me. I jumped up, looked. I said, champ, I ain't never said I was pretty as you. Ain't nobody as pretty as you, champ. It's all right now.
That's wonderful.
And so every time he'd come here, even in Rockville, Maryland, when he opened his chicken store in Montgomery County,
okay.
I got pictures in the book of me and my son and my daughter taking pictures with him, and me and he and his wife, what have you. I remember one night he sat up here, Billy Murphy had a reception for him. He stood on the floor, John, talking to us for 2 or 3 hours like he knew us all of his life. Just a great human being. Just unbelievable. We were asking for Champ, did when Sonny hit you with this punch, did that hurt? Or when Frazier hit you, and he just sat laughing and talking. Man, I felt that all over my knees, and so forth and so forth. And we just sat around drinking sodas and eating popcorn and talking to the heavyweight champion of the world. And he was in no rush, no haste, no hurry.
That's wonderful. Right.
Just a people person.
Any other memorable moments that you had with the champ? Did you didn't actually get a chance to fight him, though, did you?
Oh, I'm not crazy.
I was in a good match.
I was going in for show. This was a charity event for raising funds. It wasn't real. And what I was going to do, I was going to dress up just like I was going to put on the white trunks and the white boxing boots and tassels and all that. And I was going to do the shuffle, and I was going to do the rope and dope. Everything he did, I was going to do. Or try to do. But I told him that, don't get ticked off. If I just steal one punch, don't feel you got to retaliate.
I heard Kurt Anderson did go there.
Yeah, he videoed it.
And he said 1 or 2 little jabs, and he was ready to quit.
And Foamy said the same thing, because I think when I had to back out, a lot of other people had the opportunity to fill in. Well, they might have been called anyway. But it was Kurt Anderson, Kwesi and Foamy, and then he had a couple amateur guys who were trying to go pro that they just let do a couple of rounds with him. So it was down there at the convention center, the Civic Center at the time. And I brought my kids, and we watched even though I wasn't in the ring.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you. I mean, you brought me some laughter to me and some fond memories. So we're going to take a break on that one.
God, it was a great
and we'll be back with more Top of the Morning.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning. I had the opportunity to be here last year before this distinguished body at the request of my good friend Carl Stokes, Councilman Carl Stokes, candidate for Mayor Carl Stokes. And it gives me great honor to have the opportunity to come back before you on this auspicious occasion today. Chief Judge Barbera took everything I was going to say because I was going to give you a history lesson in terms of the judicial process in America and Maryland, which she has just so perfectly delivered. So I'll try to fill in some of the blanks that the Chief Judge may not have been as totally specific, and bring us up to a little bit more contemporary times also, if I may. I wrote a book, Under Color of Law, And the reason I spoke about the book briefly, and the reason that I talk about the book now is because I argued in the book, but before I argue in the book, let me say, the book was dedicated to my father on his dying bed. And I promised him that I would tell our story, which is incorporated in some of the things that I will say to you today. But I wrote the book also as to a warning in terms of the body politic of America, that America was retreating from the promises and the commitments that it made post-Civil War to the newly freed slaves, and then was revisited in the civil rights movement of the 60s. And that now we find ourselves in a moment of apathy, and as the Chief Judge was saying, we were saying a while ago when we were discussing this, sort of waiting or sitting on our laurels, enjoying the victories of yesterday, while we find that those things are being dissipated today and put in reverse. There was a man by the name of Grant, who was President of the United States. Now, I never understood why Grant doesn't get the publicity that I believe he deserves. Grant was General Grant, who led the Union forces in the Civil War. And Grant also was appointed by Lincoln to head up the Reconstruction that was taking place in the South. And Grant would later become the President of the United States. And Grant observed in the South, particularly, that the atrocious behavior that was taking place in relationship to the newly freed Negro, quote unquote, that he went to Congress, or had persons go to Congress, and they passed what was known at the time as the Ku Klux Klan Act. And what the Klu Klux Klan Act was legislation that allowed the federal courts to in fact have jurisdiction, both criminally and civilly, in the South. The civil legislation was known as 42 U.S.C. 1981, 1983, passed in 1871 by the U.S. Congress. I bring that up today because that is the main sword of the civil rights movement, and the jurisdiction for the civil rights movement and the Justice Department to intervene in civil rights issues that we know and argue today. And so if you come up through history, that piece of legislation and others that we shall discuss were paramount and tremendous in the advocacy of the rights beyond, as the Chief Judge just said, beyond the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. And so when we look back at Marshall, and let me, before I talk about Marshall, just let me say, Maryland is a relatively small state, but the impact that Maryland has had in terms of this national history and civil rights is unbelievable. When we look back at Frederick Douglass out of Maryland, we look back at Harriet Tubman out of Maryland, we look back at Thurgood Marshall out of Maryland, we look back at Clarence Mitchell Jr. out of Maryland, we look back at Juanita Mitchell, first attorney out of the University of Maryland, out of Maryland. Lily Mae Jackson, national president of the NAACP, out of Maryland. And all of these great people were the inspirational movers and shakers and bakers in the civil rights movement. But what is even more spectacular and definitive in the context of this discussion today, which I understood to be the impact of the Maryland judiciary in terms of civil rights, that we know that Marshall came out of Maryland. And let me just tell you something about Maryland that the Chief Judge may have missed, and if I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry. But Marshall applied after coming out of Lincoln University, applied to the University of Maryland Law School, and correct me. He wanted to go to the University of Maryland Law School, but he knew it was segregated, so he never applied.
Welcome back to Top of the Morning. I'm John Carrington, and we're talking to the author of A Story of an American Family Under Color of Law, A. Dwight Pettit. This man's a part of civil rights history. He's a part of my personal history of sports. I enjoyed your career when you were at Howard. My goodness.
I talk about that team.
You better. I mean, come on, man.
1964 was one of the greatest teams in Howard's history.
That's right.
The only thing that beat us was Morgan here. And Morgan at that time was the Morgan Bear. I mean, they were one of the best teams in the nation.
And Morgan was sending people to the NFL left and right.
Not just the NFL, but all pro in the NFL. Hall of Fame in the NFL.
Oh, my.
Willie Lanier, Leroy Kelly, and all of them. I played against those guys.
I know you did. That's why I remember you, man. You were such a part of my enjoyment of sports. I played a little bit of football, I wrestled, I ran track. Fantastic. But let's not talk about my meager career. Do you have any final thoughts for us? By the way, how can we get a hold of the book?
Well, the book can be obtained through the publisher's iUniverse. You can get it through Amazon.com and also Barnes & Noble. And I understand it's been put out across the country and probably most newsstands. But I know those three absolute in terms of its availability. And thank you all so much for giving me the opportunity to come in and talk about the book.
We'll put a bow on it, give him some final thoughts here. Talk to our people who don't vote.
Well, very few times that we have this opportunity to have such a meaningful impact in terms of our own destiny. And as again, very religious, as God would have it, this is one of those times. The presidential election is all the stars in line. You're going to have the opportunity to seize the Congress, the House of Representatives, the opportunity to seize the United States Senate, and the opportunity to maintain the White House. And if we maintain the White House, we get the spoils of victory, which is the United States Supreme Court. I can't understate that, folks. I can't say it too many times. That we really have got to be vigilant because God helps those who help themselves.
All right, and if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Exactly.
I'm tired of being on the menu.
That's exactly right. So that's where you don't want to be.
I want to thank A. Dwight Pettit for being a part of Top of the Morning. I'm John Carrington. I just want you to enjoy your day, and hey, come back again for more of Top of the Morning. Bye-bye. This is wonderful.